All right, guys, welcome back to the E63. So we're going to be doing some brakes. Two things in this. A, we're just going to be replacing all the brakes, but B, we're going to be upgrading because I don't know about you guys, but I like big brakes. I'm not going to lie. I mean, you other brothers can't deny that if a car rolls in with some itty bitty brakes.
Wait, shut your mouth. Shut your mouth.
I'm sorry? What did
You're
you
just
just
coming
say?
off stupid.
Okay, I'll stop right there. Anyway, so what we're going to be doing is replacing all the brakes, but then we're also going to be upgrading to the 390 millimeter brakes in the front. So I do like big brakes. So the stock ones are 360 millimeters, about 14.2 inches. These are 15.4 inches, almost 15 and a half inches wide. So you get an inch and a third bigger brakes, and it's actually a very, very easy mod to do. So you don't have, the calipers the same, the brake pads are the same. The only thing that you need to do is obviously get the rotors, and then you need the bracket. So over here on the table of everything we're going to be using for this job, we got brand new rear rotors. We got new front rotors, the 15.5 inch from Brembo. There's part numbers for all of this in the description. And then over here, we're trying pads. This is part 3. So we tested OEM pads and EBC red stuff pads, found there was really no difference in the amount of, the enormous amount of dust they make. So I installed these on my friend's 213, and he says the brakes work perfectly and there is no dust. He says, I cannot believe it. There's literally no dust. So we're trying these on my car, and they are actually the same pads as the 213, which is kind of cool. Obviously, to install these rotors, we want to do it the most safest, way practical. So that is to buy brackets. So I bought brackets for these. These are all front brackets, and I bought them from Poland because they're extremely hard to find. AMG 390s. Turns out they're the wrong brackets. They don't fit. They fit the caliper fine, but these holes are way too far apart. So kind of wasted my money there. Got frustrated. Already bought the rotors. Not sure what to do. So I just kind of leave everything and then move on to the 430. So on the 430, I found out something. So these brakes are also pathetically small. They're 350 millimeter rotors with a really, really small caliper. So I want to upgrade them to the 402 millimeter challenge brakes. So I buy a challenge caliper, try to install it, and obviously it's missing something between the knuckle and the caliper. So I go through and do a little more research, and I find out light bulb that Ferrari essentially installs a spacer between the knuckle and the caliper, very similar to these that I had made. So if it's good enough for Ferrari to put on their most extreme applications in the race car, it's got to be good enough for here. So what we're going to do is we're simply going to put these spacers on here like this, and that'll give us the clearance we need for the calipers. Now, I had my friend machine these up, fellow Mercedes owner. They are amazing. They're 304 stainless, so they're not going to compress like aluminum, and they are highly professionally milled to perfection. So you're obviously going to need longer bolts. So I went to Porsche for that. These are 911 bolts that are about 15 millimeters longer. They're super strong, 170,000 pound tensile strength, so they're plenty strong for our application. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so first thing we're going to do here is go ahead and remove some fluid from the brake reservoir. You need to do this whether or not you're replacing the brake fluid, and this is just so you don't overflow your reservoir. I'm going to go ahead and do a whole flush, so put new fluid, so I'm going to go ahead and suck it all out. For that, just use a syringe. I put a towel around here so I don't drip any brake fluid. Obviously be very careful because brake fluid will remove your paint, which is another reason why you don't want this thing to overflow. Many of you guys have seen my last video where I just replaced the pads. This one I'm going to be doing the pads, the rotors, and removing the calipers, front and rear. So you get a couple extra things in this video. In addition to this, I'm going to be refinishing this. It's a very typical thing that the clear coat just kind of falls off these. So I'm going to be refinishing these. I don't know if I'm going to make a standalone video on that or not. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started. So you can actually rotate this around pretty easily to give yourself some more room. And then we just start taking off bolts. So an E10 to remove the wear sensor. Probably easier to get this when the pads are out, but if you move the little clips, you can kind of pry it out. There we go. Obviously be careful you don't nick your paint. So we're just going to drive the pins out. One cool thing about the power stop pads is they come with all new hardware. And then a 13 millimeter for this guy. So what I actually do is kind of screw them back in a couple threads. Just tap them out. Remove this pin. Now if you can actually squeeze these open with your hands. Remove the pads. Now we're going to use a 10mm Allen to remove the caliper Allen bolts. So now you can either get some kind of hook. I'm going to use a zip tie, and this allows us to kind of hook this to the coil. So I'm going to go and put that in place. And now we've got our caliper just kind of hanging in the way, and we can move on to the rotor. Now just use a T30. What I do is I don't remove it all the way, get it loose like this, and now we're going to try to pull this off. So now, depending on the age of your car and how much salt or rust your car's been exposed to is how easy the rotor comes off. Usually the reason I leave that in there because you don't want it to pop off and drop a 30-pound rotor on your hand. But if you give it a couple good whacks from the back, you'll know if it's going to come off easy or not. A lot of people also recommend hitting here. That'll also get it kind of loose. And it doesn't look like we're going anywhere. So what we're going to do, and I had to do this the other side, is get a torch, just heat it up. So I'll probably get it nice and hot, so it's maybe 200 or 300 degrees here, and it'll come off a lot easier like that. You'll actually hear just a little bit of popping as it expands, and that kind of is it expanding more than the bearing behind it. See? All right, so now we've torched it for a few minutes, so let's see if we can knock it off. All right, switching to the loud one. And now careful, because it's hot, we can remove. Now if you're getting rid of the rotors, hit it with a metal hammer. If you're not, you're going to want to stay with a rubber mallet. Good luck. One thing I did on the other side, I tried brake clean. I tried a couple other things, and it didn't really work to kind of clean this up to beautify it. Just using a little bit of isopropyl on a Brillo pad actually works very, very well. So as an example, I scrubbed this for about a minute and a half. Look at that, it's already looks a lot better. So you can repaint these. You really only see this part, so no reason to get too crazy. But I like it looking better. All right, so in the back of the caliper, before we continue, we're going to go ahead and put this guy in here, and this is going to retract the piston so we can put the new pads on there. And again, if you fast forwarded this part, just make sure that you've made room in your reservoir, because this is going to shove a bunch of fluid back up in there. All right, so now we can mount our new rotor on there. Make sure it sits nice and flush. All right, so here we are, ready to put the caliper on. Okay, so now what we can do is cut our caliper free. So we're going to slide in our new Porsche bolt, put our spacer on it, now our lower bolt with its spacer. For final install, you definitely want to use thread locker here and torque to spec. All the torque values are in the description. Now as you can kind of see, the caliper is perfectly situated in there, so let's go and get the pads in there. All right, so here we have all the parts I'm using. I think if you add this all up, retail it's about $1,600. So I think these are $1,000 for the pair. Those are about $200 each, and then the pads come up to about, I don't know, $150, $200 total. But what I will say is look for sales. What I do is always put part numbers in eBay and just kind of look around. You find things on sale. So those rotors I got on clearance from FCP Euro for $25 each. The Brembo huge rotors I got for, I'm not gonna kidding, $350 for the pair, brand new. Then the pads from Amazon. I got links all in my description. Hopefully you guys get lucky. If not, it's not too bad. So anyway, let's go ahead and get these opened up and installed. So I'm only doing kind of a test fit just for the video's sake, and then I got to take these back off and paint them. But we're going to put a little bit of lubricant here, 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 and then a little bit just on the pistons. Nothing over crazy. After you get it in there, just slide it in. Reinstall our retaining pin. Now we can install our clip retainer. Just gently tap them into place. And And then don't forget to hook up your sensor. If you bought a new one because your old one's worn, you know, replace it. If not, then you can just clip it right back into place. Now that we got these all tightened down and torqued to spec, we can go ahead and kind of take a look. So as you can see, the caliper alignment, it looks to be perfect. There's just a little bit on the inside here, which is how they're supposed to be set up. It's not supposed to be past the outer edge. And then we can kind of come over here and see these perfect spacers that my friend machined. So I'm actually really happy with the caliper alignment, and I'm confident in this setup. So now I gotta pull these off and paint these, but let's go on to the rears. All right, now we're moving on to the rear. All we have to do is just tap the pins out like we did up front. Now just remove the pins. Now on this one, you can either use your caliper spreader, or I found that you can very easily push the pistons back in with your hands. That allows the spring to come out. Remove both pads. If you're just doing pads, that's all you got to do. Put the new pads in there, but we're going to be doing the rotor too, which means the caliper needs to come off. I'm going to remove this E10 bolt here holding the harness on. On the passenger side, there is another wear indicator. It is not on the driver's side, but you do have to remove this to get the caliper out. I'm just going to put the bolt right back in there. To get the caliper off, you're going to need an 18 millimeter. Get back here, just break these nuts loose. And then just zip tie the caliper out of the way so it doesn't fall. Again, just like the front T30, loosen but don't remove. Leave it in there. You can remove the T30 and remove the rotor. Now with the rotor removed, you can see your parking brake assembly. There's no reason to touch this unless these are worn or your parking brake's not holding, but generally these aren't going to wear out unless you're driving with the parking brake on. Really not a lot of cleanup needed. Now we can go ahead and install the new rotors. Put the retaining screw on. All right, now we can cut our caliper free and reinstall it. All right, so I've tightened the caliper bolts back on there. All the torque numbers are in the description, like I said. Don't forget to reattach your sensor with the E10, snug it down, and then we're ready to put new pads in the back. Now, of course, we install the pads. So I've put a smear of grease here, here, and then a little bit for each piston. Same thing with this one. Now we can just reinstall the retaining spring with its pins. Obviously, when I am all done with refinishing these, I will do it, I'll clean these up really, really good because it did not come with new hardware for the rear, oddly enough. And just slide these pins in. There we go. So super easy job to do pads and rotors on the rear. So we got new pads and rotors on the rear, upgraded new pads and rotors on the front, but I'm going to bleed the brakes. But before they do that, I got to pause it because I'm going to be refinishing these calipers. Not doing a video on that, but let's see if this works. Go, Cokes. Bam. All right. So I am done. Paint is done on these. So this is how I like to do a brake job. Fully rebuilt caliper with brand new paint, brand new hardware and everything. This is a two-part Honda paint, base clear 2K, so it should hold up really well. I'm kind of feel dumb mentioning this, but I actually debated the color on this longer than I've debated most things in my life, mostly because of the connotations of I don't want to be a poser, but the red just clashed. You know, there's a lot of other colors to choose from, and for some reason, this color just seems to go well. So yes, that's why I painted it. And at the end of the day, my wife was just like, do what you think is best and stop worrying about what other people think. And I'm happy I did that because these came out really good. And all the decals are an exact scan of the previous decals. I scanned them and printed them myself and cleared them underneath there. So they came out really well. Now I just need to get some tires on this thing and it's ready to go. So the way I like to do it is I put one of these clear hoses on the end of each nipple on every single brake. This allows you to do it really fast. Each one of these, it's only like a foot long, just enough to get into a water bottle. So now we're going to go ahead and refill the reservoir with our favorite .4 fluid. No need to get it too full here. And then the rest of the fluid we're just going to add straight to our bleeder. I do this all but maybe just the last little few drips. Install the top. Now we're just going to attach the bleeder to the brake reservoir nice and snug, but not too tight. And then what I like to do In the 0.005 chance that one of these hose ruptures, I like to just cover everything with a towel just to keep the brake fluid explosion contained. I know that's unlikely, but it's just, I would not want to have to deal with that. And then we're just going to pump this up to about 10 or 12 PSI. So if you already have one of these pressure bleeders, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, you need to buy one. They're one of the best tools I have in my shop. They make it so easy to bleed the brakes consistently as well. So I usually start at one of the back brakes, like the back left. Just crack the bleeder, let the fluid start to flow out on its own. You'll see bubbles come out, and then the dark fluid turn to light, and that's when you know you're pretty much done. Close the bleeder, move on to the next one. Before I go on to the fronts, I usually like to just double check the reservoir to make sure the fluid is flowing to the reservoir fine so you don't run it dry. Let about 4 to 6 ounces out on each of the fronts, close them up, and you're done. You got a full flush done in just a few minutes with minimal work, no pushing of the pedal. It really is wonderful. Here's kind of a comparison of old fluid versus new fluid. So you can see there's a definite benefit into getting some new fluid in there. And then go ahead and use the last bit of the fluid in the container to top off the fluid. And then we are all done. All right, guys, so finally, after a ton of work, I can finally say that I am done with the brakes on the E63. I finally have a setup that I'm going to keep, and I'm totally happy with it. And I'm not lying about that. So we did a bunch of stuff. So let's recap real quick. We went through and did new rotors front and rear, new pads front and rear. I obviously refinished them. This is a very controversial color that I'll get a lot of heat for, but I don't care. I like it. And then lastly, I upgraded to the 390 millimeter rotors here in the front. And so that's 15.4 inches, and it makes a huge difference, especially in the stock 19s. Check it out. They completely fill up the rim. I mean, they look massive in there. And then one drawback to 20s is they kind of make your brakes look small. So these bring them back up and make them look big again, which is really good. There's supposed to be obviously a performance increase because we've increased the diameter of our rotor. Hey, and a quick edit for my subscribers who've been kind of following along in this whole wheel drama. So variant rims, or as I like to call them, the Willy Wonka rims. So there has been no contact, much less any resolution with the company. But after that talk with them, I had to get the wheels off the car. So they are off. I've tried a couple different setups. And anyway, I've settled on one that is behind me. And hopefully I'll be revealing that in the next couple videos. And hopefully this will be the forever wheels. We'll see. Part 2 of this was actually talking about brake dust. So we talked about the EBC red stuff. We talked about the stock brake pads on my silver car. And basically, after like a week of driving, you literally have brake dust down the side of your car. The wheels are completely coated. So like I said, this is 2 weeks, about 280 miles of driving right now on these brakes. And check out how much brake dust there is. Like I said, I have not washed these at all. This is kind of up close. And so this includes kind of the break-in part of it too. It almost looks like there's some sand down here, but for the most part, man, they are clean. There's no brake dust down the side of the car like there was before. So, and even my caliper is clean. That would normally be covered in dust right now. So I think we may have found a low dust pad that works for these. They don't squeak. I haven't had any issues with them at all. They seem to brake just fine. And I don't know. I guess I might put my stamp of approval on those. So anyway, guys, I'm really happy with this setup. I highly recommend it. All the part numbers are in the description, so just check them out where I bought it. And hopefully you guys can replicate some of the deals that I got. Thanks for watching, guys.